If you've been with me through the first three parts of the series, then you already know part of the story. It isn't a religious lesson, and it isn't something I'm telling you to believe. This is a different way of looking at history through another eye, another way. When I left off, Cain had long since disappeared into history, not because he died, but because time itself had ceased to matter. The curse didn't simply create one immortal, it created a bloodline, generation after generation, century after century. The descendants of Cain multiplied. Settlements became villages, villages became cities, cities became kingdoms, and kingdoms became civilizations. Somewhere along that forgotten road, the wandering land of Nod was no longer remembered simply as Nod. According to legend, it became known as Nodden, and from Nodden arose 13 great houses. Just as the descendants of Seth built their own families and nations, so too did the descendants of Cain. Two bloodlines, two destinies, one remembered in tradition, the other only remembered in whispers. Not tribes, kingdoms, or houses, but blood, family, and inheritance. Each house carried a fragment of the original bloodline. Each guarded its own traditions, its own alliances, its own ambitions. Yet all 13 answered to the ancient covenant preserved by the house Nodden, the house of Cain. House Nodden was never considered the strongest. It wasn't the wealthiest or the largest. It was simply remembered the genealogies, the traditions, the old laws, and the names. History remembers King. House Nodden remembers blood. But the descendants of Cain inherited more than blood. They inherited memory. They inherited loss, exile, and a curse. Think about Cain for a moment. He lost everything: his family, his inheritance, his homeland, his place before God, and everything that gave his life stability disappeared. So, what would a man like that search for during an eternity of existence? Control. Not because he wanted another kingdom, not because he needed another fortune, but because a man who has lost everything spends the rest of his life trying to make certain it never happens again. Perhaps that desire becomes the true inheritance of his descendants, not merely the curse of immortality, but the need to control a world they believed never again to be allowed to control them. So, how does an immortal think? Not like us. You and I think about next week, next month, next year. Kings think in generation, empires think in centuries. But an immortal has all the time in the world. Imagine living 1,000 years, 5,000 or 10,000 years. How many kingdoms would you have ruled? How many fortunes would you have accumulated? How many wars would you have won? How many times have you fallen in love, only to bury the one you loved? After enough centuries, enough even wealth loses its value. Gold becomes another rock, a palace another house, another kingdom, another empire, another victory. Eventually, it all begins to taste like yesterday's scrambled eggs. You've seen it all, done it all, owned it all, and lost it all, then done it all over again. So, what challenges remain? What could possibly excite someone who has already experienced everything? Control. Not because they needed more wealth or another crown, but because influence over the lives of others became the last game that still felt new. Perhaps immortality doesn't simply change the body, perhaps it changes the mind. When nothing surprises you anymore, when nothing satisfies you anymore, when time itself has become meaningless, control becomes the only thing left that still gives you purpose. And control means you never feel the loss of your ancestors. Maybe that is the real curse. Not living forever, but searching forever for something that still makes forever worth living. Many ancient traditions throughout the world seem to organize themselves into similar patterns: 12 tribes, 12 councils, 12 divisions, but there is always a 13th, not as another tribe, but as the keeper, the recorder, the judge, the one who stands slightly apart. In this matter, the 13 houses of Nodden became a shadow of another ancient pattern. Coincidence, parallel development, or simply the human tendency to organize itself into familiar numbers. For thousands of years, the houses remained together, not because they loved one another. Far from it. They argued, competed, married into one another, betrayed each other, even fought one another. But they never completely broke apart, because the covenant still existed. The first house still held the records, and everyone remembered one simple truth. No matter how powerful one house became, they all descended from Cain. The first exile, the first wanderer, the first cursed man. Then something changed. History remembers Charlemagne. History remembers the rise of a great empire. This story remembers something different. According to legend, the age of Charlemagne became the last age of unity, not because Charlemagne ruled the 13 houses, but because his lifetime represented the final moment when both empire and covenant still held. After him, everything changed. Great states divided, ancient alliances weakened, old inherited traditions began to change and collapse. Younger heirs no longer accepted serving the elder brother forever. Every son wanted land. Every son wanted authority. Every son believed his branch deserved to rule. History remembers the rise of medieval dynasties. I call it the Great Fracture. The 13 houses didn't disappear overnight. Events like this never happen overnight. They take centuries, perhaps even a millennia. Remember, the immortals weren't in a hurry. They could wait. One branch becomes two, two becomes six, six becomes 20, and 20 becomes 100. Some changed their names, some disappeared into obscurity, some married into rival houses, some abandoned their original identities altogether. To ordinary historians, it looked like noble families rising and falling. To the descendants of Cain, it was simply another move in a game that had already lasted thousands of years. As the centuries passed, the old names became whispers. House Reuven, House Simonor, House Levi-Achkar, House Danor, House Naphat-Or, House Gad-Arel, Asher-On, Iskak-Ar, Zebulon-Ar, Ephraim-Or, and Manasseh-Or, and House Nodden, keeper of the covenant and of the blood, keeper of the names, of histories, keeper of traditions. But even House Nodden could not stop time. Libraries burned, kingdoms collapsed, records disappeared, blood mixed, dynasties rose, and then dynasties vanished. The world forgot, or perhaps the world was encouraged to forget. Today, how many of those original names still exist? All 13? Half? Only a handful. Full. Perhaps only 3 or 4 still openly remembered their ancient origins. Perhaps the rest dissolved into history under entirely different names. Or perhaps every one of them still exists, hidden behind names we no longer recognize. That is a question no history book can answer. Everything in this series borrows symbols from history, or borrows names from history, and this story belongs to history. I'm asking you to think about it because sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones history never wrote. And in our final chapter, we'll ask one last question. If only fragments of the original houses remain, who inherited the legacy of Cain? Maybe the names changed, but the blood didn't. Maybe the kingdoms disappeared, but the families remained. And maybe history has been asking the wrong questions all along. You decide. Later, taters.
Attention passengers, we've now reached our destination. We hope you enjoyed the flight and have a nice day.